What's going on, guys? It is Cole Patterson and welcome back to another intermediate level tutorial. In this one we will be doing a 2-for-1 with the width tool and the warp tool located at the same point, both of which are right here. We will hold down click and you will see that amongst other tools the two main ones are the width and warp tool, with the shortcuts of course of Shift plus W and Shift plus R respectively. We will go ahead and get started with the width tool first, and it's mostly straightforward. You take a point on, and when I say point, I don't mean an anchor point, just any point on a path, hold down click, and you can move outward or inward to change its width. So let's go ahead and reselect that and show the opposite effect. It is now much thicker. But again, this is not a fill, this is still considered a stroke, just with a dynamic thickness to it. Interesting stuff. More interesting once we get into its full potential, which is, let's say I wanted to make something which tapered. So I'm going to go ahead and take my warp tool using Shift W, and I'm going to get these as close as I can, just eyeballing it to their regular length. And then I'm going to take my endpoints and I'm going to, let's zoom in a bit for this, taper them. And suddenly we have some very sharp lines. Now consider this while making line art for something, say wrinkles on a bag or on a more elderly face. Other uses for this could be, let's say, I don't know, making a mustache. Let's go ahead and do that right now. I like to think of a mustache as kind of thick towards the middle and a little thinner towards the edges, kind of rounding out on either side, but maybe not quite that much. Let's go ahead and thicken it up a bit on either side, like so, and then we can go over to our direct select tool and round this out, and that is not the worst mustache I have ever seen. If we were to take this and, ooh, not what I wanted to do. Let's go ahead and take this and scale this down a bit. And just for the fun of it, let's take our brush tool and look at that. We have a classy man with a classy monocle. Now let's go ahead and put that back there because we're about to do something interesting with it, which is work on a more precise level with the width tool. And we do that by, instead of holding click, simply double clicking the point we want to do and bringing up the width point edit window. And what this allows us to do is control the total width as well as the width on either side of the point. So by increasing that more on one side than the other, you can see that the total width, which is located where I clicked, is still going to be where I left it. At the thickest point, it will be 3.75. However, or 0.375. However, on one side, it will taper off much more quickly than the other. Now, you can also keep these in proportion if you so desire it. There's a lot of playing around with it that you can do. We're going to go ahead and unselect that. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this to a 0.3. And then we're going to go over here and do the same thing and set that to a 0.1. And then, oop, what we can do with this is we're going to take it and move it over. And I'm not entirely sure what this is supposed to be. But when I look at it, doesn't it look a little bit like someone holding their hands together and looking down? I was going for something a little different, but now that I'm looking at it, that's what I see, and I quite like it. I may hold on to this for the future, actually. Oops. Now, secondly, we have a much simpler tool, the warp tool. Now, before we get into how to precisely use it, let's just have a little fun with it. We have something that very clearly is a brush, so let's just hold down, click, and move across something. That seems like it has potential, don't it? You wait till you have the selection of something active, hold down, click, and just play around with it a bit. And you can do, it's very easy to mess something up with, but it does have its actual practical uses. If you want to give something kind of a distorted, blended paint look to it, or if you wanted to give something a bit of a blur without it being a blur, like something kind of poured to the side look, this is something very powerful for that. You can also use it to give it a kind of rough and tumble curve that doesn't really follow a rigid structure, a clear mathematical repeating formula. It's something that requires a little bit of finesse to use correctly, but it is something fun to play around with, and I encourage playing around with things that you don't know how to use, because eventually that'll retain and you'll come back to it and have a proper use for it. Now, with using the warp tool, you also have the option to double click the tool itself and change the brush settings, so the width and the height. Let's make something that has more height than width, and then let's change the angle on it to 30% and leave the rest the same. You can see that our brush has changed a bit, and we can actually start straightening this out, not perfectly, but again, apologies for any background noise I may have. I don't have the heart to tell a person what they can't do in their own home. We'll just go ahead and deselect that. It's a very straightforward tool, but I find that it's a very fun one to know and a fun one to use. I hope that you've learned something today. We'll be back next time to learn about Pathfinder and Free Transform. Alright, until then.